Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session Strengthening Your Application to Medical School. This session is part of the 2020 Graduate and Professional Fair organized by the Office of Intramural Training and Education at the National Institutes of Health. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers today, who are also part of the pre-medical team. Dr. Zukoski, do you want to start?
Hi, I'm Kristen Zukoski. I'm one of the pre-medical advisors at the OIT.
Thank you. Dr. Tabor?
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. John Taborn, and I'm a pre-medical advisor and career counselor here with the OITE.
Thank you. My name is Elena Hernandez Ramon. I am the director of the pre-medical program at this office. And we advise hundreds of students every year to successfully get into medical school. And today we're very excited to share this experience and hopefully very useful information for you and for your medical school application. So today's plan is to discuss why medical school, what is a competitive application, how to improve the elements of your application and your timeline, the reapplication, some other programs like DO programs, MD PhD programs, and also, and very importantly, wellness during this process. So I'm going to start with the first part, and that is about why you really want to be a physician. We have seen students coming to our office, and when we ask these questions, sometimes the reasons and the motivations are not very clear. So we really want to invite you to reflect on those reasons. What are the motivations behind this decision? And we strongly encourage you to know yourself, to discover your interests, to develop your skills and your values, and to see how this makes a good fit with the medical profession. Very importantly, we invite you to go ahead and explore the medical field. So these steps that include this exploration, both in the clinical setting, could be hospitals, could be clinics, could be shadowing too, or other experiences like serving your community or taking leadership roles, can help you confirm if this is a career for you. So we strongly encourage you to see this part of your application or of your journey as something yourself need, right? You need to confirm this is good for you. And of course, later on, your medical school admissions would like to see these experiences and would like to see that those are strong experiences for a long time and they are actually strong. So we strongly recommend you to go ahead and explore. And also, we recommend for you to check the AAMC core competencies for entering medical school. So the Association of American Medical Colleges is an organization that actually represents more than 140 schools, most of the US schools and Canadian schools. And these competencies help you to see what skills have you developed and maybe what skills you still need to develop to be a strong applicant. So we strongly recommend you to check these competencies before starting this journey. The application is complex, sometimes it's overwhelming. So we invite you to preparing ahead with a good time to make sure you have a competitive and balanced application. For that, we have a list of aspects that we consider are very important for this preparation. Medical school admissions will see if you have an interest in science, and of course, that's going to be represented by your major or the courses you have taken. They also want to see that you have a good academic performance and you have problem solving skills. The usual way that medical schools look at these aspects is checking your GPA, especially your science GPA and your MCAS score. So when people ask about what are the numbers that make this application competitive, we send them to the MSAR website. This is part of the AAMC. In this website, you find information of every single school, and the information you find there, among other information, is the GPA, the science GPA, the MCAT, from people who applied and from people who matriculate. So we're going to emphasize all these aspects first. We're going to share here the numbers from the students that apply in 2019 and the 2019 cycle. And it is important to remember that the average number we see here represents, as the name says, the average school in the nation, right? Sometimes these numbers can be above the average in some schools or below the average in some other schools. So for that cycle, applicants had a GPA, science GPA of 3.48 and matriculants at 3.66. GPA non-science 3.72 for applicants, 3.81 for matriculants, and total GPA 3.73 for matriculants. So at least you have an idea of what are the schools looking for. Again, you can take this information from MSAR from every single school. In terms of MCAT score, 511.5 was the average for the 2019 cycle, and the applicants had a 506 average MCAT. I need to remind you again that every school may be different, so I just have an example here from a school that has a 511 as the example we gave you from the average school in the nation. 511 as the median MCAT score. However, there are other schools where the median is so high that the 511 doesn't even reach the 10th percentile. So it's very important to check your schools to make sure that those are target schools. For the MCAT, make sure that you identify from the beginning if you need to study in a group, to study by yourself, if you need courses, if you need guides, what are the best guides for you or the best courses. And for that, we strongly recommend you to watch a couple of workshops we put together. Actually, Dr. Sukowski was in charge of presenting those courses, and they have a lot of information, comprehensive information about resources, about tips. MCAT essentials and test day preparation is also included there. So these links are going to be listed at the end of this presentation, so you can access that from our website. Now, other very important aspects of your application include your experiences. So we were talking at the beginning about this exploration, right? You need to go out and go to the clinical setting and test yourself this interest. The clinical exposure, we divided in three main parts: the clinical volunteering, shadowing, and clinical jobs. So for your clinical volunteering, you are really giving a service to your community in a clinical setting. And that is different from shadowing, right? Because in the first one, you are actually providing the service, and in the shadowing, you are, as the name said, just observing the physicians. Now, there are two kinds of shadowing. You can shadow actively or passively. And one of the recommendations we have in our office is that you need to try to get this active shadowing. When you shadow these physicians, we try to encourage you to ask for this extra time from your physician to at least let you know what kind of patients you're going to have so you can study beforehand. You may take notes during that consultation, and you can also ask for a few minutes of the physician's time to try to discuss the case or to ask your questions. That keeps you engaged with the case and makes this shadowing active. Sometimes that is not possible, and you need to shadow passively, and that is also fine as long as you also have active shadowing. Some of you have the opportunity to work in clinical settings, and that's totally fine, and that gives you also a very good source of information of what the medical profession is about. Your experience in the clinical setting, of course, is very important because it's going to give you information about the medical environment, the medical profession, right? What doctors do. However, another important part of your application is the service you provide to your community. Many times when you express in your personal statements that you want to be a physician because you want to help people, it is interesting to see that many times people don't have community service. And that's the way you actually prove that you have this interest in helping your community. So make sure that you can show that to your admissions, that you really care about people and you want to help them. And you have been helping in other capacities. And now, as a future physician, you will continue helping them. So all these experiences are very important. The final section I want to discuss are research experience. So research is something very important. It's the only way medicine advances, and your medical school admissions want to see that you have this experience. Sometimes you have experience in your undergrad institutions, and that is very good. Sometimes you have experience during summer internships, and sometimes you take gap years to actually have more intensive experience. And we're going to talk about that gap year later, but it is important to recognize uh, when you can have this experience. And if you haven't had the chance to do it during the summer or in your undergrad institution, make sure you do that after graduating in a post-bac program or anything like that. During your observations in the hospital, we also hope that you have observed the leadership role that doctors have in the clinical environment, right? The doctor is usually the leader of the team. So it is expected that you start developing these skills um, before applying to medical school. Some of you have been tutoring, teaching, or even in any kinds of jobs when you manage people, when you lead teams. So make sure that you also have this category covered. And finally, other extracurriculars that everybody can have, everybody's different, have different passions, different interests. So make sure that you include other extracurriculars, including artistic endeavors, including sports, including hobbies, right? You need to show that you are a person. You need to show that you also have an outlet, you have a way to release your stress. So this is also an important part of your application to find this time to take care of yourself. So finally, this is just a chart that is showed at the MSAR University of Maryland section. And you will see here information for the pre-medical experiences of first year class, the first year class. And all these parts that you see here, let's see if I can highlight this. You see different um, aspects of your application, different experiences. This is community service. This is physician shadowing. And this is the medical clinical volunteering, clinical jobs, and research. So as you can see here, this is the percentage of students from that class that have these experiences. So you can see very clearly that all these 4 experiences are very important. And most of the students that are entering these schools, and this pattern is actually very common among schools, they have at least these 4 categories very strong. So I really want to emphasize that your application is not only about your numbers. You really need to show this experience to have a strong application. And for that, I have a table I also want to share with you. So this is a table from the AAMC that shows the acceptance rate according to total GPA and MCAT score. So as you can see here, this is MCAT going from GPA, from low GPA to very high GPA, and here the same for MCAT, low MCAT and higher MCAT. So as you can predict, the higher your GPA, the higher your MCAT, your acceptance rate also increases, right? And that is actually what we see in this table. What I'd like to emphasize is this particular group here, which are the people who have a GPA 3.8 or higher and an MCAT 518 or higher. So these people actually have stellar numbers for an MD application. And of course, most of them get in. More than 87% of them get in. However, more than 12% of them don't get in. So I just want to highlight that one of the most common reasons why these people with the stellar numbers don't get in is because they lack these important experiences, mainly the clinical experiences. So this is not only about numbers, right? Of course, there may be other reasons in some cases, like a bad personal statement, a bad interview, and other reasons. However, the clinical exposure is a critical point for your success here. And also, there are other people who don't have those stellar numbers that, as the group I am highlighting here. However, from our experience in our office, we have seen that these people who don't have stellar numbers, they have very strong experiences, clinical experiences, leadership, research, or a good combination of these. So We strongly recommend you to take into consideration all these important aspects in your application. So for the next section, Dr. Sukoski is going to talk to you about the plan. So Dr. Sukoski.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Hernandez Ramon. So now that you really understand what a competitive application looks like, the next step is to make your plan and decide when and how to apply in the strongest way possible. So as Dr. Hernandez Ramon showed you, a competitive and balanced application requires all of these elements. And so it's a matter of deciding which ones you need to work on and when you are going to apply. So the first thing we recommend is really to clarify what you need. And so that would involve meeting with a pre-medical advisor. Do you need to improve your GPA? Do you need more clinical or research experience, or do you need to retake the MCAT or gain other experiences, again, that are going to convince you, but also convince the medical schools that you really do want to be a physician? So one way that many students do that is by taking a gap year. We know almost 60% of students take at least one gap year, and there are a variety of things that you could do during that year after your graduation, including different types of post-bac programs and research programs. So I would encourage you to watch the pre-recorded session entitled Academic Post-bac Programs, What's Available and Why Complete One. There's also information on the AAMC site about a variety of different post-bac programs, so I would encourage you to explore those possibilities as well. The next thing you need to do is decide when you are going to apply, so understanding the process of choosing schools and the AMCAS application. When you're choosing schools, we know that choosing schools wisely can really determine your success. And so what criteria do you need to use when you're choosing schools? Go to each one of the school's websites, look at their curriculum. Do they have a research focus? What communities do they serve? And where are they located? Medical schools know that it's really important in many cases to have family support as you're going through medical school. What's the weather like? Are there other factors? And use the MSAR to look at the numbers for GPA and MCAT, and that means both in-state and out-of-state. So this is a really important factor, is your legal residence. And what you can see here, this line that is highlighted with where these circles are, is that there's this one school in particular, UC Riverside, that there we go, that accepts 0 students from out of state. But you can see with the next circle that a high percentage of students actually apply from out of state, but there's no way those students are ever going to be accepted. So take a look at the numbers, because they do vary between in-state and out-of-state student numbers. And how many schools to apply? We say 12 to 15 schools, 8 to 10 of which are in your target range. That's so that you can really spend time and energy, and you've spent time on the front end choosing the schools that are right for you, so that you, when you get your secondaries, can submit those well and in within a very short window. So the application is the AMCAS. That's the centralized system for the MD application, with the exception of Texas, and OD schools use a different application. So I would encourage you to download the AMCAS applicant guide and read it very carefully, because it has a lot of information that is going to be really useful to you. The AMCAS application has all of these elements, including your information. It allows you to write a disadvantage or hardship statement, the schools you've attended, your coursework, your MCAT scores, 15 experiences to again highlight that work and activities, letters of evaluation, choosing your medical schools, and your personal comments. So this is 1 for MD applicants and 3 for MD PhD applicants. If you would like to watch our longer version, that is tips on filling out your AMCAS, you'll have access to this at the end as well. One thing to note is that you do need to report any institutional actions, felonies, and misdemeanors. So I'll just note here to make sure you are thinking about your behavior as you are going through school and beyond, because that does get reported and could affect your medical school application. Another element is the personal statement that I mentioned. And UMD admissions says that a good personal statement won't get you in if you don't have a competitive application, but it can ruin your application even if you have very competitive credentials. So we also have a longer version of this, writing your medical school personal statement. So I would encourage you to check that out as well. Recommendation letters are also a very important part of the application. So make sure these are from people who know you really well. And that means starting to build those relationships from a very early stage in your career, especially because some of those early classes are very large. So you want to make sure that you're getting to know your professors, your PIs, those people who are going to be able to write you strong letters. So now you need to make your timeline. Make sure you are completing all of your coursework well. We know that that is really important. And then start your clinical exposure as early as possible. Work on other important aspects and take the MCAT when you're ready. I really would stress that you need to wait until you're ready to do well, but hopefully that's no later than January of the application year, but after you've taken all of your relevant coursework. So a possible timeline, if you are planning on applying for cycle 2022, would be to take the MCAT starting in January. In March, contacting your letter writers. After that, organizing your experiences and crafting your primary application. We recommend that you submit your application as soon as possible when you are able to do so. So that would be early June. Submitting the secondaries within 2 weeks of receiving them. And then in August through September, you would be preparing for your interview. And after that, interviewing, choosing your medical school, and matriculating in the summer of 2022. Now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Taborn.
Thank you, Dr. Zukoski. I'm going to be discussing a few additional programs and a little bit about wellness during this section, so you have that. And those of you who are applying to additional programs have a little bit of more information. Okay, the first thing we'll talk about are those of you that are applying to DO schools or Doctor of Osteopathy, looking for that route. This is something very important because it is another route to being a physician. It's a different, instead of an MD, you're getting a DO. And these are some things that we want you to keep in mind that will help you strengthen your application. The one thing that many applicants for DO programs may not know to do is to shadow and or have informational interviews with actual DOs or Doctor of Osteopathy. This is one of the things that is very important to do because it makes a difference in your application, and I'll talk about that in one moment. You also, when you're applying to DO schools, you'll be applying through a COMAS instead of instead of the AMCAS, which is the application service for that. And in there, when they're asking you about your shadowing experiences and writing your personal statement, you want to make sure that you're prioritizing or putting first shadowing experiences from DOs. Because as mentioned earlier, you want to have, not only do you want to have experience shadowing and doing some clinical exposure with medical doctors, but because you're applying to DO schools, you really need to make sure that you have that experience as well, so you can make that case, which is my next point. In the personal statement, the personal statements for DO school will say, why do you want to be an osteopathic physician? You need to make sure that you say that clearly, why you want to pursue this route. And many applicants may not do that. They say, well, I want to be a doctor because, but this is particularly for this program of studies. So you want to make sure you have that. We also recommend in there when you're discussing shadowing, again, in your personal statement, that you're talking about a shadowing experience with a DO, as well as with a general or an allopathic medical doctor. I also recommend making sure, or if you have at least one letter of recommendation from a DO. All of this is really very well spelled out. If you look at the ACOM, which is similar to AAMC, but for DO schools, American Association of Colleges of Medicine website, spells that all out, as well as how to apply. And they also have an excellent resource for even sourcing and finding DOs to shadow and have informational interviews with. The last bullet point, there's a little mistake there, but I would just add on there, for when you're applying to DO schools, sometimes when I'm working with applicants or when we're working with applicants, there's another pathway called naturopathic physician, which is ND. And that's a little different path in DO or allopathic medicine. And both of them are working with the holistic approach to medicine, but you might want to explore that a little bit more, just in case that's the path that is a better fit for you. The next, we have mentioned earlier a little bit about the statistics regarding MD, PhD program applicants, but this is a couple tips for when you're applying, how to strengthen your application. The one thing that I would have you remember, as my colleagues have mentioned, is that when you're applying to MD, PhD programs, they're called medical scientist programs, but you're really applying to two things. You're applying to medical school and to a PhD program, where you're going to be learning to become a researcher in a PI and contributing a dissertation and preparing yourself to be a researcher, as well as preparing yourself to be a licensed physician. And many times when we're working with students, sometimes they think that MD, PhD program is a kind of a special, unique path where you can, being a medical doctor to help inform your research. However, when you're applying, it's important to think that you're applying to do two different programs. So you're preparing to be a physician and a scientist. The other thing is to think about who your audiences are when you're applying to MD, PhD programs. They're not only MDs and medical doctors, they're also MD, PhDs, as well as PhDs. In other words, you'll have people that will be licensed physicians, as well as those that are experienced researchers. So that's why there are three different, as Dr. Zukoski mentioned, three different personal statements for these applications. One, why do you want to be a physician? The next one, why do you need to have an MD and a PhD, or the MD PhD? And the third, why do you want to be to discuss your research? Something else to help strengthen your application is something that we know. Some applicants that apply to MD, PhD programs, they may apply right after they come out of undergrad, but sometimes you might need to have an additional year or two of doing research before you apply, so that you have more independence doing research, and you can really talk about that. During these 2 years, which is why we call it a gap or bridge year, you will be able to get more independence with your research, perhaps have more presentations or publications to scientific audiences that will enhance your application for that part of the application. So that's something to consider. Also, thing to note to strengthen your application for physician scientist programs is to make sure that your MD personal statement, or why do you want to be a physician, or in other words, tell us about what you've done to prepare for a physician, speaks specifically to why you want to be a physician. And that is talking about the shadowing experiences, the clinical experiences that you've had that prepare you for a physician. Quite often when we see applications for MD, PhD programs, that essay tends to sound a lot more like, this is why I want to do research. And so to strengthen that application, make sure you are in that essay really focusing on the things that we've discussed in this workshop as well earlier. And also the last thing, or also equally important, almost last thing, equally important, is for the MD, PhD essay, make sure that you are making a case to the committee members who we mentioned that are both MD and PhD, why in the future, when you're done with school and you're out practicing and doing your work in the field, that you will benefit from having both the medical doctor license and MD and the PhD, and then how they're going to come together. Quite often in this essay too, MD, PhDs will talk about the research and why you want to do research, but they do not mention the MD and why you want to be a physician and why you need that in the future. So discuss both in this essay is the recommendation for strengthening. And then regarding the research essay, and this essay, this is very important. And main thing with this essay is that an example would be, is that you're really discussing, let me rephrase that. What you're really looking at and what the missions are looking at is, do you understand the process of conducting a scientific research experience and project? That means from the beginning, when you're creating research questions, to the methodology, to the results, why the results are significant to the larger body of research, and also if you have presented and to audiences, scientists, and published. While publications aren't necessary always for MD PhD programs, even if the presentations are, if you have them, it's also helpful, which is another reason why that's another way you can strengthen your application. We also have a workshop that you can consider watching that we have a link here as well about really strengthening the MD PhD application. But we want to bring it up here for you in terms of thinking right now when you're applying about how to strengthen. Okay, and then what's important for all applicants to med school, regardless of which programs you're applying to, is to note that each year, one of the medical schools say that approximately 28 to 30% of applicants each year are reapplicants to med school. And the things that many people that are reapplying to medical school are concerned about are, will I be viewed as highly as the first-time applicants? Will it make a difference? Does it concern that I'm a reapplicant? Reapplicants are looked at equally as highly as first-time applicants. Oftentimes, you have an opportunity here to show improvement from last time when you applied. So it's really very important, if you consider it, to go ahead and do it. The AAMC, this is just a few comments here, or a slide from the AAMC. These are some of the most common reasons applicants aren't successful in terms of they might not have known about if they didn't work with a pre-med advisor or haven't thought about the importance of the GPA and the MCAT, really the science GPA and MCAT. They're quite a bit higher for MD PhDs, as you saw, as we talked about earlier. They might, for all programs, you might not have done well during the interview. So you could have applied well, but the interview didn't go so well. Also, the timing of the application. We recommend applying early, which we had mentioned earlier, in the month of June or July is early. Mid-July to August is mid-range, and then when you're applying September, October, you're getting later in the cycle. The reason why we recommend early is so you get verified early, and then you have your secondaries come earlier, and then you have more opportunities for interviews. So if you're applying later, you may not have had as many opportunities to interview as many schools. Also, the weak understanding of medicine we've discussed is you may not have made the case to a medical school or to a DO program or whatever that you really want to be a physician. And so we talked a little bit about that earlier. Essays we've discussed, as well as school selection is important. We discussed a little bit about that, but sometimes applicants apply to schools that they really want to go to, but they haven't looked at creating a group of schools that are some within range, some that are reach, and some that are safety schools, and maybe not enough schools. So you want to kind of take a look at that. Also, if you're reapplying, you have the opportunity to add new schools now that you're reapplying. So just a couple more points if you're reapplying. The goal is to, with all of these, when you're reapplicant, is to show improvement over areas that might be weakness before you reapply. There are many applicants that if they don't make it the first year, they hurry up and they reapply right away within 2 months. And they haven't had time to show a significant increase. Medical schools like to see, they call it distance traveled, or it's not how fast you apply, although the applicant, you might feel that way, but it's the distance traveled and what you've done to show improvement. Very important. You also want to approach it with a can-do mindset that I'll discuss a little bit more, or if you have anything in your mind, in your thinking that you might want to reframe. So if you're reapplying, sometimes people feel a little defeated, but now you can work on that so you can know that you can do this. We recommend revising your entire application, looking it over, having pre-med advisors, previous med schools, those give you feedback. Previous med schools you've applied to, if you've interviewed, you can request if they can give you feedback from them to see if they have suggestions of how you might strengthen your application. That's very helpful for you to use when you're reapplying. Pre-med advisors can help you as well, because we can have an objective look at your application and give you some feedback. As mentioned earlier, a lot of things you might want to improve: the science GPA, MCAT, and the other things I've already mentioned. One thing I'd say down here is we also have a reapplying to medical school webinar that's really, we'll get to in more details in this, which is very helpful if you're reapplying. The other thing for strengthening your application is that we see, and I'll just mention this, is that part of the application process is not only the paperwork and submitting primary and secondary applications, it's your interview. We have a workshop coming up next week that's going to be excellent for thinking about preparing for your interviews. The one thing we would have you think about is who your audience is during interviews, because a lot of times when I ask this question, applicants will say, well, it's going to be medical school faculty, but they aren't realizing the diversity of people that they could be interviewing with. And that could be faculty, alumni, retirees, students of all different kinds of, ranges. So sometimes when you get to the interview, it's prepare for that part. Also thinking about and practice your interviews and think about the variety of different types of interviews you could have. Right now, because of the pandemic, a lot of schools are doing virtual interviews for med school that you want to prepare for that we'll talk about. Also prepare for traditional interviews, multi-mini interviews, which are more like if you work out at the gym, like a circuit where you're going through a variety of different kinds of short questions that you're answering. And a lot of these are getting at some of the softer skills or some of the more relationship, empathy, ethics kind of questions rather than your science skills. And there's a little method to that and resources that we discussed in the workshop. Also, for those of you that are MD, PhD programs, prepare to discuss your understanding of research in depth. So you want to prepare for that. We want to mention to take into consideration applying well or considering your wellness during the entire application process. One of the things that we focus on at NIH is preparing scientists, and you will be a scientist as a medical doctor, to be healthy scientists in the future. And so we want to have you think about wellness. And what we think about wellness, we think about it in 4 realms at NIH. And when I say NIH, our OITE office has a holistic model of self-care that we use. And as you're thinking about strengthening your application, these are things for you to think about doing while you're applying throughout the entire process. The four areas are body, mind, heart, and spirit. The body means you're taking care of your physical self. So you're exercising, nutrition, eating well, and getting enough sleep. The mind is really kind of like what you're thinking and if there's any kinds of thoughts or thought process that you have that might be self-defeating or not helpful during this process, that might be helpful. For example, when we're talking about reapplicants, sometimes you feel a little defeated and like I didn't make it and I won't be a doctor. That might not really be true. In reality, you have an opportunity to reapply again, reapply into values, you can go ahead and do it. When you kind of start thinking about it that way, you start getting more motivated to move forward. Also, in terms of the heart, that's where we're really thinking about your emotions. And you're really thinking about, are you feeling strong? Are you feeling a little defeated? Or do you need to get counseling or help? That will help you apply strongly. And you need support through it because it might be feeling up and down during the process and reaching out for support. And spirit is really about, are you connected to something larger than yourself? We talk about it as thinking about it as being a human being rather than a human doing. Because a lot of times when you're preparing, you're always doing, but you don't stop to think about what really matters to you and what really is really important to you through the entire process. So these are some ways to think about strengthening your application throughout the process. So again, the application process is long. It might start as early as April or May the previous year, then you apply in June, and then there's interviews all the way through to the next March. That's a long, almost a year process. So during this time, just recognize that you have to keep going, and you will have moments of doubt. You'll have moments that are great, moments you feel like things are getting to the best of us, and you might have stresses and conflict, but also know there's going to be periodic wins through the process. And the goal is to develop ways to take care of ourselves so that we can be our best throughout the process. And with that, these are some additional resources for wellness that we have on our website. But for those of you that, if you're an NIH trainee, you can utilize the wellness resources we have here. For those of you that are joining us from other universities and across the nation when you listen to us, you might look into wellness, counseling, pre-med advising, career advisors from your home institutions or community can help you with these resources as well. As well as we encourage you to not only think about yourself, but think about any uses that family or affinity groups that you might be affiliated with can be a support to you through these process. Also, we have an OITE careers blog that is open that you can read, and we have a lot of different articles on a variety of things, including wellness, professional, and grad school. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it back over now to Dr. Hernandez Ramon.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Taborn. So we are going to quickly discuss a case with you so you have more practical information here and see how this student went through this journey and how he successfully was accepted in medical school. So this student applied for the first time several years ago with a science GPA of 3.06, GPA 3.1. First MCAT 499, second MCAT 506. He had an institutional action. However, the way he described this experience was a little bit like blaming the school, not taking responsibility of his actions. He has some undergrad research. At that moment, he was a postdoc at the NIH, had some clinical exposure, but actually in the lower end, not very strong. And then the rest of the application was actually let's say in the lower end, and I will take this opportunity to say that we have seen that students that have everything like the checkbox, but in the lower end, sometimes are not seen by admissions. So I forgot to say that when I was talking about the application. So anyway, this student started with this application. He was about to submit. At the moment we met him, and I wanted to ask Dr. Zukoski, Dr. Tabon, what do you think about this case? What would be your advice?
Sure. So one of the things I noticed right away is that science GPA, the GPA, and that MCAT score. And so if I was meeting with this student, I would talk about what the next steps are to show improvement in those areas. Schools do like to see an upward trend, and especially in high level science courses. And so I don't know that only a couple of courses would be enough, but definitely encouraging this student to take some additional courses, as well as thinking about whether or not to retake the MCAT. So a 499 to a 506 is a significant improvement, but it's still not really hitting the mean of the national mean. And so I would encourage the student to also consider retaking the MCAT.
Great, thank you. And I forgot to say this student was trying to apply to MD and MD PhD programs. So Dr. Tabor, any additional advice to give?
Yes, thank you. You know, when I look at this, one thing that I'm thinking about is when one of the initial things I'm thinking about if I'm meeting with this student is while we have this information, when we meet with pre-med, when we meet with it for advising, we like to get an understanding of the student, their background, including their application, how they approach the application if they had pre-med advising. Also, a little bit about any of the things that we discussed earlier in terms of uh, uh, if they have academic hardships, ethnicity, a whole variety of things. So we have a full view of how this applicant applied the first time through. Relevant to this, things that will come out to me in addition to what Dr. Zukoski say, is I would be taking a look at the institutional action. If it's blaming the school, we might want to consider revising that, because what medical schools are looking at, this is about integrity. So it's not that you're saying that the school did this to you, it's more about what have you learned from it, and if you did any kind of what I call it remediation or counseling or anything to help. And some applicants don't know to say it that way. And so we want to take a look at how you might want to revise that. I'm also looking at clinical exposure in the lower end, because clinical exposure is so important, meaning the direct patient care as well as shadowing. That might be something that we want to take a look at. And as we mentioned, even for reapplicants, or as we mentioned them earlier, these are some things that you might want to have the person show improvements on before they reapply. Also, if they're a person that may benefit from, and if they chose to use it or may need to revise it, if they had a disadvantage or what I usually think about as a hardship statement, if that's beneficial in some way, and we want to take a look at that, reviewing all the entire AMCAS application itself would be very important.
Okay, thank you very much for the advice. And actually, that was the advice we gave to this student a few years ago. And it was very interesting because we know that sometimes it's just hard to hear that you need to wait, right? So this student applied that year, and he thought that maybe he could be lucky and get in. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. So he came back to see us next year. And he said, so this, when he learned about the results, you know, that you apply in the summer and you can be completely sure until next year by March or April, right? So unfortunately, he hadn't done so much about these other aspects. The only thing he had additional to that application was more research because he was at the NIH, right? So we advised again, you know, I think it's important to take your time to really fix the weaknesses before applying again, because what we identified as weaknesses were not addressed, right? But again, so for the second time, the student applied, and unfortunately, he was not lucky again. So for the third time, or after this second application, the student reconsidered and realized that he really wanted to address the weaknesses. And unfortunately, he was open this time for advice and some options that we recommended. And he went to a master's program. He got a 4.0 during this graduate program. Again, as Dr. Zukowski mentioned, it was not a matter of taking 2 or 3 courses because that was not going to change significantly that low GPA. But with this program, he was able to take many courses, rigorous courses, and he got a 4.0. He retook the MCAT and had a 5.10. He continued his clinical exposure, the leadership, the service he was doing before. So instead of being in the lower end, it was actually above average, so that those aspects were also strong. The institutional action was still there, right? But the approach he took this third time was much more mature, and he took responsibility of his actions and explained that, you know, he was a different person and how he learned what things he learned from that experience and how he worked on developing some other skills to compensate that. He published because, as I told you, he was applying to MD and MD PhD programs. So he was very interested in research. He published 4 papers, and 2 of them were first authors. And he attended lots of conferences and presentations. So after this third application, he was very successful. He received actually several acceptances, both from MD and MD PhD programs. And in his case, uh, it took a little bit longer, right, to get to the point where he wanted, but he finally addressed the weaknesses and he was successful. So that is the main message we want to give you today. The application is, we know, overwhelming sometimes. There are so many important aspects to highlight, to work on, but if you take your time and work on all these aspects, then you're going to have much more chances to be successful. We have a lot of resources at our office, many workshops that I am listing here. However, as this presentation is not going to have hyperlinks, you can use the first website, the first link we have here. It is just called www.training.nih.gov, which is our website, and then strengthening your application. And you will see a list of links of the workshops that are listed here and some other important information that Dr. Zukowski and Dr. Taborn mentioned before. So with that, I think we are finishing. We want to thank you for your attention today. We usually hear that some people say good luck at the end of these kind of presentations, but we really think that this is not a matter of luck. We think that you can actually follow the 3 Ps that we have here. You can plan, you can prepare, and then you can perform and perform well. So if you follow this plan, we are sure you're going to be successful. Thank you very much, Dr. Zukowski, Dr. Taborn, for this presentation, and we wish you the best in your application.